Greetings, you curious, you courageous Herle Burly-ites. A New Year's resolution from me is to come up with a few new and snappy adjectives to describe this fantastic listenership. I'll be thinking about that round the clock until our first show of 2024. Bank on it. But here we are in late 2023, with housing prices still out of sight, availability of affordable housing negligible, government measures crawling slowly into place, Poilievre making hay, and 15-minute docu-dramas viewed by over 2 million people on the subject matter. I want to talk about all of that today, and I couldn't have two better, more engaged with the issue people to do it with. Mike Moffatt is an assistant professor in business, economics, and public policy at the Ivey Business School at Western Ontario. He's also the senior director of policy at the University of Ottawa's Smart Prosperity Institute, running the policy shop arm of that organization. His current area of research is on Canada's housing supply and affordability crisis. He's authored many research reports, made hundreds of media appearances, and given hundreds of keynote addresses and panel appearances. His team's work has led to several public policy changes at all levels of government, and in 2023, he was named one of the most influential people in Ontario real estate. Ron Butler, in addition to being an old drinking buddy of mine, is a 28-year-old veteran of the mortgage industry and one of its most prominent names. He's the founder and a principal of discount brokerage Butler Mortgage, Inc., and he's a hugely outspoken voice on the Twitterverse on the subject with over 41,000 tweets and replies. A few months ago, he launched his own weekly show, Angry Mortgage Podcast, to share his insights and vitriol on the subject. So today, we're going to benefit from Mike's 30,000-foot view and Ron's boots-on-the-ground experience. What's happening in the market right now? And where do we go from here? Ron, Mike, thank you so much for coming on the Herle Burly today. This is a big, gnarly subject to get our arms around.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Yeah. Thank you. It's getting gnarlier by the day. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so how would you describe? Let's start with you, Ron. How would you describe the current state of play? Take a couple of minutes and lay it out. What do you see out there?
Sure. There's no good news. There's just no good news. There's a glimmer of light in terms of the government's move on purpose-built rentals and the reduction of GST, the elimination of the GST. Ontario matched pretty much right out of the gate. That's all positive news. We get some more PST matches across Canada. Mike know more about that than I do. That's the only ray of sunshine I've seen in the last, months. We are looking at the lowest home sales in the TREB system since they started keeping records. Like, that's 1992, and there's probably another 4 million people here since 1992 in Ontario. So it's cataclysmic. It's just cataclysmic. That's an incredible number. Mm. My contacts within the lending space tell me that every single new development in terms of whether it's a small developer, small builder, they're either just stopping, been turned down for financing, or they're just going to wait, which is an incredible...
So people aren't building?
No, it's an incredible indictment of what's going to happen in 2 more years. Like, it's just a frightening example of how much worse it's going to get, because as Mike will tell you, the people are still coming. The new folks are still arriving. They're coming. Yeah, so right. we got issues on the horizon, that's for sure.
Right. Mike, what's your overall take about where we're at?
Yeah, same thing. That we've got high interest rates, which are affecting both the supply and demand side. So prices are, relatively stable, but, sales volumes are down substantially. We are seeing some rays of good hope politically. BC's government, in fact, is doing a number of fantastic initiatives. They're really leading the way on this. But I got to tell you, as a prof, I am really worried about next summer. I think next summer is going to be an absolute disaster on the rental market. Neither the federal government or any of the provincial governments are really interested in doing much on the international student side. So we're going to continue to see enrollments go up. We're not really building any student residences, and all of those students need somewhere to live. So rents are going to skyrocket like they have the last 3 summers in places like my hometown of London, Ontario. And we're going to see the few sales that are out there are going to be investors buying up single family homes and turning them into student rentals. So it's making it really hard if you're a young family with kids or about to have kids, looking for a place with a backyard, and the couple other people competing with you are planning on turning it into a student rental for sometimes a dozen or more international students.
Right. How long have you been studying this, Mike?
About 2017, 2018. So not that long. And my route here was really circuitous. My background is innovation policy and manufacturing. And we were doing work with groups like the Toronto Region Board of Trade back in 2018 or so, looking at labor market shortages in the manufacturing industry near Pearson Airport. And we would run roundtables, talk to people, that kind of thing. And what we kept hearing over and over from manufacturers was like, well, we can't find anybody to work here because nobody can afford to live here. And, when you tell me something like 24 times, eventually it starts to sink in. So we started doing housing work kind of at side of desk to support our manufacturing work. And now the housing part's about 120% of what I do. And I'm very grateful when I get a call about manufacturing or, my old innovation life, because it rarely comes up these days.
Ron, you've been in the business for quite a while. Did you see this building up? What were you observing over the years did anything like 10 years ago set off an alarm bell for you that we were headed toward this point?
Well, since 2015, there's been a constant observation that these prices don't make sense anymore for homes. Let's just use the simplest possible ratios. If we go back 20 years, 25 years in Ontario and most of the rest of Canada, but particularly in Ontario and British Columbia, the average home price was roughly equivalent to 2.5 to 3.5 times the earnings of the average family. So now we've moved into the stratospheric 9 and 10 times ratio for average family. That's bizarre, appalling, and unmanageable for a society. All right, I'm going to simultaneously kiss up to the host and state a fact. And this comes directly from...
Some of my favorite comments.
This comes directly from Herle. But the thing is, it's incredibly viscerally true. Nobody believes they're part of the middle class if they don't own a home. And that is departing from Ontario and British Columbia. That is going to be a thing of the past. And interestingly, in Atlantic Canada, since the virus of investors has spread to Halifax and New Brunswick, to Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, that disease is starting to sink into the Atlantic as well, that homes are becoming unaffordable for average income earners. So we have to accept that this is destructive. It's destructive to our society. It's destructive to the whole fabric of economic rationality in Canada. And if people wonder, like, why are young people so damn mad? Well, you'd be mad too if you thought that you would never be able to buy a home. It's out of reach unless you go to Brandon, Manitoba, or Prince Albert or Leduc. So ultimately, that's where the anger comes from. That's where the negative energy comes from with young people.
Yeah, and
Mike,
I'd like to weigh in on this. When I started seeing alarm bells, and it was more in my personal life. So in 2017, summer of 2017, we sold our home in London, Ontario, and moved here to Ottawa. And back at the time, London had pretty much the highest unemployment rate in Canada, or one of the highest. Us and Windsor were 1-2 in a competition nobody wants to win. So we, like most middle-class people, we go and get a realtor, and she says, okay, we think you should list it for that much. And I was thinking, like, that's just a bananas number. Like, no way. We just bought it 3 or 4 years ago for significantly less. And she was like, no, Mike, trust me. Well, long story short, we sold it for 15% over asking in 2017, at a time where London's unemployment rate was one of the highest in the country. And I noticed, because I would kind of be there and watch during the open houses, everybody who was kicking the tires on the home were couples in their early 30s, all from the GTA, either all with a little one in tow or a baby bump. And I'm like, this this isn't right. This does not make sense from a regional economic development point of view when you've got an area that struggled for about 10 to 15 years with the manufacturing decline to see home prices going up 15%. Like, you don't see that in places like Toledo, Ohio, and other parts of the Rust Belt. So for me, that was a real wake-up call to see what was going on in southwestern Ontario, even back in 2017.
Right. Just to stay with you, Mike, for a second, I've seen stats that are quite surprising that show that we were building more homes in absolute numbers in Canada in the 70s than we do today. What would cause that?
Well, it's a number of factors, but that's absolutely true. Like, if you look at Ontario, the last time we built even 750,000 homes in a 10-year period was between 1973 and 1982. So for TV fans out there, that's basically the run of the TV show MASH. We haven't built that many since then, and it's a variety of factors. Some of it is, taxes and regulations and development charges. We have to remember, we didn't have development charges 40 or 50 years ago. And, some of those regulatory things were put in for very good reasons. Like clearly, we don't want to have, miles and miles of sprawl. Some of the developments we did back in the 1970s didn't necessarily make sense. So that was part of it. We had a tax system in the 60s and 70s, which was very favorable to building apartments. So that's a big component of it as well. And then finally, the social housing side. The government was far more involved in building homes in the 60s, 70s, and 80s than they are today.
Right. Ron, on the Curse of Politics, we often talk about what kind of homes people want. And the consensus between Corey Tenike and myself is always that people aspire to a single family unit with a yard and a garage. Is that still true?
Still true. It's absolutely true. They will be satisfied with a townhome and a tiny postage stamp lot beside it and a single car garage. But yeah, people, look, we can talk about density till we're blue in the face, but at the end of the day, when you talk to people about their preferences, some people are fine with living in a condominium the rest of their existence, but the majority of people we talk to, and the vast majority of new Canadians, want to live in a home of their own. They want to live in some kind of, they're okay with a townhouse, but they want to live in some kind of, that's their aspirational model, is they want to live in that kind of a house, which we frankly don't build any of today, or virtually none. Some, there's way too many 3,000 square foot, extremely expensive homes being built, and a ton of high-rise towers, which satisfy the density, but I'm not completely sure whether they are ever going to fit some of those aspirational desires. And apropos of what Mike just discussed, we have gone so far off track on development fees. If you want a simple answer, we've got property taxes in all kinds of major cities being underwritten by new people buying houses or buying condos or buying anything new. So what the hell sense does that actually make? Like, you've got people sitting in their homes, Vancouver, having the lowest
because that's a politically easier way to raise revenue than raising taxes on existing homeowners.
100%. But it has reached the point where you want to talk about this stranglehold of older people sitting in their homes and never giving them up. If you have ultra low property tax, Vancouver has the lowest property tax of a city its size in all of North America. Nobody even comes close. Oh, and by the way, if you're 55 and up, the provincial government will make sure you don't have to pay any property taxes. I mean, it'll be recouped when you finally get rid of the house. But it's unbelievable that the whole concept that the people who enjoy homeownership, who make use of all the facilities, and who have seen the gain over 20 years of massive equity in their homes, massive wealth increase, they pay the least, and young people who want to buy a home pay the most. And the development fees, which were supposed in theory to just hook up the sewer and the water and put in a parquet and a community center, now about 65% of all those revenues just go straight to general. So that's just feeding and underwriting the property tax, which is frankly ridiculous, but it's a key factor.
Mike, can you comment on what Ron just said? And in the process of your answer, can you touch on whether it is possible for us to satisfy that aspiration of a single family unit for everybody?
Well, on the first question, yeah, Ron is bang on, right? That imagine if we wanted to design a system to slow down home building. Let's say we as a society said there was way too much home building. Well, what would we look for inspiration? We would probably look to the carbon tax, right? Development charges are basically a carbon tax on building homes. It's the exact same logic that you make it really expensive so people find alternatives and you have less of it. Well, that's essentially what's happened. So, you get the outcomes that you kind of designed for. Whether or not those design choices were intentional or not, economics doesn't care about your intent. Economics cares about your actions. So absolutely. On the second one, I think young people would be frankly happy with anything, right? They, kind of asking somebody who doesn't know where the next meal's coming from, asking them, "Are you going to be okay if it's not caviar?" They'll probably be fine. But I do think there are ways around this. First of all, there are sort of building code changes and other things we can do to incentivize, larger apartment units. So I think that would help. But as well, if you look at our single family housing stock in a lot of suburbs, so again, go back to London, Ontario, you have either entire neighborhoods of single family homes that are student rentals, or entire neighborhoods of single-family homes that are occupied by people who are between 75 and 90. So, there are policy solutions to both. That if we can build more student-friendly homes, we can unlock that inventory. And if we can build more seniors-friendly homes, we should be able to unlock at least some of that existing inventory. So I think there are solutions here. And I think part of it is just utilizing our existing stock a whole lot better than we do now.
So how could that happen? Who would do that?
Well, I think the student one is relatively straightforward. I mean, you either need to build more on-campus housing, incentivize the building of near-campus housing through zoning changes or things like that. And governments will have to kick in some money. But I think at some point, governments have to go, okay, students need somewhere to live. We've got more students than homes. So either we need fewer students or more homes, and they have a choice to make. Right. On the seniors friendly housing, I think there are interesting things that we could do on the zoning side to allow for, a bit higher density of residents for people 55 and up. Because if you talk to a lot of seniors of why they don't sell their home, they say, well, there's nowhere I can go to. That anywhere's kind of a lateral move. And I could move into a condo, but all the condos are downtown. I like being in this neighborhood. This is where my friends are. This is where the dog park is. I don't really want to leave the neighborhood. So if there were ways that we could find, ways to create, gentle seniors friendly density in existing neighborhoods, we might be able to unlock some of that inventory.
Well, now, look what's upon us. The calendar has rolled over into December, and that can only mean one thing. Sound the online gift certificates and fire up your debit cards, ye old Herle Burly-ites. It's giving season. I said it here exactly 12 months ago. I don't think of giving necessarily as a 4-week season. Neither does our presenting sponsor tell us. Giving is a core value with them. It happens 365 days a year and takes thousands of forms. That's the way core values work, eh? They don't take any days off. So I'm going to spend the next few weeks in this space highlighting a few of their giving initiatives. Stay tuned for those. But if you're a pod listener and a TELUS subscriber, and you feel like you want to share in the giving feeling right now, allow me to direct your attention to the TELUS Change for Good program. Change is a pun here. Remember the stuff that used to jangle around in your pocket, died out back in the early aughts? This is the digital version of that. When you sign on to the program, they'll round up your bill to the nearest dollar every month, and then redirect those cents to the TELUS Friendly Future Foundation, an independent, registered charity that believes all youth, regardless of circumstance, deserve an equal opportunity to reach their full potential. The foundation supports over 500 local charities providing health and education programming. Just a few examples: the Children's Aid Foundation of Canada, Drugs Free Kids Canada, YWCA Canada, Breakfast Club of Canada, Innovations for Learning Canada, and Young Adult Cancer Canada. Over 2 million kids are benefiting in some meaningful way. You can go to telus.com/change4good to learn more, or join the TELUS Change for Good program by visiting your My TELUS billing page. It can change a kid's life. See, that's the other side of the pun. But you smart Herle Burly-ites knew that already. All right, so there's a couple aspects to this. There's people who have homes, and there's people that don't have homes. Let's just spend a few minutes on people who have homes and what's happening to those people, Ron. What is the situation for mortgage holders facing renewal right now, and what are you advising them to do?
Well, the bulk of these renewals are going to be taking place next year and the following year. This was not a particularly big renewal year that we've just gone through. And the interesting part is, in reality, by the time we get into 2025, the rates will be down. So the impact of these higher renewals will not be as absolutely ridiculous as they have been this year. You know, when you're taking someone from 339 to 639, it is a phenomenal shock to the system. I mean, it's just like a holy shit moment. What am I going to do? So we're not going to have as much of that in 2024 and 25 as rates come down. Rates have already starting to come down. We've seen bond yields drop a full 1% in the last 5 weeks. So, you know, we will see some relief as we move into that zone. A rate with a 4 in front of it is eminently easier to live with than a rate with a 6 in front of it when it comes to renewals. So will we see people on a kind of renewal cliff by the end of next year? Probably not so much, but it will be impactful in terms of the wealth effect is just being obliterated. You know, we're even seeing reductions in values in some regions. If you look at the 905 region of the GTA, all those prices have come down, and they continue to come down as we speak, like on a weekly basis.
Really? Because the data I've seen indicated that the prices that the sales activity had fallen off a cliff, but that the prices had only come down marginally.
Well, the prices change daily, and the sales, every property value is at the margin. Every property value is recreated for a whole neighborhood by a sale that takes place yesterday. And I see that stuff on a daily basis, and on a daily basis, prices in particularly the far reaches of the 905 come down daily. That's the reality of it. Not core 416, not core Vancouver. That's not the case. I mean, there's a million other influences going on in those core locations than just people's ability to get a mortgage or ability to pay a mortgage. That's a whole other episode. But the bottom line is, in many regions, the prelude to lower prices is absence of activity. It's absence of sales activity, and then eventually it grinds down. Being the oldest one here, even older than David, I'm older than David, okay, by 7 years.
Some said it can't be done.
I'm older than David by 7 years. So I have a really clear recollection of 1990 through 95 in Ontario. And very dead market presages the reduction in price. So, you know, we're going to see more of that. But for those people on renewal, it's going to be manageable, but it's going to further hinder their disposable income as we move forward into the next 2 years of renewals. That's absolutely going to happen.
Mike, there's a lot of talk about this 2024 to 2026 period where all these renewals happen. Ron's obviously hopeful that rates are going to come down. Are you seeing any aggregate economic data about what the impact of that's going to be?
Yeah, well, Ron's right that we're seeing bond yields across the globe. So it's not just a Canadian phenomenon go down and go down significantly. So, you know, hopefully that trend continues. I think in Canada, we've had a lot of weak economic data. You know, real per capita GDP's gone down, I think, 5 quarters in a row. Consumption's gone up a little bit, but, you know, that seems to be more a function of our growing population than anything else. So, if I'm Tiff Macklem, I'm kind of looking at these things, and there's, you don't want to have a repeat of the 70s where you take your foot off the gas too soon, or take the foot off the brake, depending on what analogy we want to use. But we want to avoid that. But our economic data is suggesting that the economy is sufficiently weakening. So that should allow rates, the target for the overnight rate, to be reduced probably sometime in April, which again will be good news for the reasons that Ron suggested. My concern is, as those rates go down, what happens to home prices? Do we start to see a significant rebound again? Unless we do something on the population growth side, I think so. If I'm an investor looking at a London, a Guelph, a Brampton, or so on, and I see a bunch of federal political parties who don't want to touch any population growth levers, I'm buying, and I'm buying substantially if rates are low enough. Just because, if you've got 9 or 10 new people for every new home, that math suggests that the prices over the long run are going to go up with, a bunch of month to month and year to year volatility.
Right, but maybe home prices would go up as a consequence of lower rates. But Ron, you also implied earlier that if rates were to come down, maybe more building would happen. That there's a lot of building being on hold right now because of rates.
Sure. There is no question that once it's clear that rates are lower, we'll see more development on the construction side. But it's always a tough time question. So, if we talk low-rise homes, single detached homes and townhouses, we're looking at 16, 18 months from start to completion. The real trouble area is the high-rise condos. I mean, in some cases, those are 5 years from the time the backhoe goes in the ground until it finally becomes a fully occupied condominium. I mean, and by the way, that's about 75% of all the new homes in the GTAs is that type of build. And it's really in a dramatic pause right now. I mean, again, people don't notice it because the buildings that are set to complete are completing, but it's what's going to happen over the course of time. So there's a lot of things to worry about. And Mike's point about this endless increase in population is absolutely true. It puts effective floor under prices. When we look back into the 1990s, the early 1990s, when things were so quiet and prices were down, there was no such thing as this level of immigration. So a quick thought on that. I'm fortunate enough to talk to people who fly up from New York to chat about, and Boston, to chat about what's going on in housing and banking in Canada. And I posed this question to them. I said, listen, what would you do if you had 9.5 million legal immigrants come in every year, such as that's the equivalent of what we're doing in Canada right now. And all 4 of them looked at me like I just uttered something that was unfathomably foul and said you couldn't even imagine, that will never happen in this country. That's not possible. So I think it's important for us to grasp, I know Mike does because he studies it all the time, but to grasp the level of this increase in population, vis-a-vis other countries it's just way out there. And no matter how much illegal immigration is coming into the United States, which supplies them with very low cost construction people, the amount of legal immigration that we have in Canada is so high vis-a-vis other countries that it's sometimes hard for us just to grasp it.
So I was invited to a thing last week in Ottawa, the Canadian American Business Council's annual celebration of the enduring relationship most famously described by JFK when he said, "Geography has made us neighbors, history has made us friends, necessity has made us allies." It's a set-piece event with florid speeches by our ambassadors and appearances by politicians keen on publicly embracing a concept pretty much everyone values. This year, the headliner was former Republican House Speaker Paul Ryan, who actually is a pretty good speaker. He spent a lot of time explaining why his party should nominate anybody but Donald Trump. For political junkies, that's red meat, and the room was full of political junkies. But there was something else on the night's agenda, and it was just plain heartwarming. The Business Council honors someone every year, usually a high-performing entrepreneur or company. This year, though, it chose former President Jimmy Carter. It was quite a statement. In an era largely defined by nasty, vulgar, ad hominem political discourse, honoring a thoroughly decent man who shunned wealth and dedicated himself to bettering humanity felt pretty good to watch. The fact that he risked his life as a young nuclear expert in 1952 to contain a meltdown at Canada's Chalk River reactor put a rather fine point on that selflessness. Anyway, the former president's family is mourning their matriarch, Rosalind Carter, and couldn't make it to Ottawa. But there was a lovely session with former Prime Minister Joe Clark and his wife, Maureen McTeer. Joe knew and worked with President Carter, and it was great to be able to listen in. Our sponsor, CN, is a proud member of the Canadian American Business Council. CN is perhaps the quintessential cross-border business, linking Canada and the United States with a railway network that spans both countries, from Halifax to Vancouver and down to the Gulf of Mexico. CN helped make the dinner and the session on Jimmy Carter a reality. So a tip of the hat and thank you. Oh, incidentally, after exposing himself to more than 1,000 times the safe level of radiation at Chalk River, the future president was told he would never have kids. He has 4. It is, what is the total, Mike? If you add up legal immigration, students, refugees, what is the total?
It's going to be about 1.2 million this year. So immigration, which is permanent residency, is about 500,000. Yeah. And then the net increase in non-permanent residents is about another 700,000. And that's a combination of international students, refugees from Ukraine, temporary foreign workers, and so on. Though I'd say that that non-permanent status or non-permanent term is quite misleading, particularly when it comes to international students. That we've made the decision as a country about 15 years ago to start using higher education as a pathway to permanent residency. And I actually think at a high level, it actually makes a lot of sense to have people come over at 18 or 19, get their credentials here, and then apply for permanent residency. But we never. Well,
if they're studying physics at the U of T, yeah. Perhaps not if they're studying business at the Herle School of Business in Brampton.
Well, that's the challenge as well. That when we, as a country, decided to outsource a lot of our immigration system to our colleges and universities, we kind of lost control over it. And absolutely, where we're seeing the big increases is, introductions to international business and foundations of the tourism industry and so on. And I've got nothing against business students or business faculty being one of them, but do we really need 100,000 people in Ontario studying introduction to bookkeeping? I don't think so. If this is welders and plumbers and roofers, then yeah, absolutely. I think you can make that case, but there's a real disconnect.
Are they even taking those courses, or did they just use that to get in?
No, they do take the courses. I mean, a lot of it is online now, so they don't even have to show up to your Brampton campus. They can do it from their apartments. But they are hoping to get permanent residency, and the colleges have all the wrong incentives in the sense that, like, if you wanted to put in an automotive body shop at your school to train international students, that's really expensive. But if you want to get some talking head to teach 1,000 students online introduction to business, I can give you a half dozen names right now of people who'd be willing to do it and willing to do it for pretty cheap. So the colleges are going, more often than not, look to put students in places that are cheap to educate, and that's very rarely the places where we actually need skills.
Right. Ron, how do you see this? You're the one that brought up the immigration numbers. How do you see it impacting the market on the ground?
Well, first, I just have to get it out there. Like, nobody loves immigration better than I do. I mean, I think almost all of us are at least the grandchildren of immigrants. I mean, I think there's a fundamental fairness issue that if we all got in, we should be more than happy to see others come in. And by the way, the bulk of these people they are some of the hardest working people I know. Like when sometimes we reference Brampton, but if you go up to Brampton and start to go into some of the manufacturing plants there, you'll find out that there's just thousands and thousands of people doing jobs that people who were born in Canada are completely unwilling to do. Okay.
Yeah, no, Ron, let me take you off the hook. This is not an anti-immigration conversation on the part of any of the three of us, but I'll just speak for myself. It was about a year, maybe a year and a half ago, when I realized that the numbers of people that are let in is not in any way connected to the services they will require or our ability to absorb them. Yeah. It's just an arbitrary number. And so it's that I'm struggling with, not the notion that we would allow significant numbers of immigrants in.
Well, I think I listened to that interview that was on the Herle Burly, and that was a discussion of how that the provinces only got 10% call on what kind of labor force they wanted to come in. And then, we could jump to the whole 50,000 limit in Quebec, and we could go around and around for another episode. But at the end of the day, some of these people, to Mike's point, are being victimized. Some of these students are being absolutely victimized in worse ways than just you operating that business school in Brampton. I mean, they are being charged $800 for a futon in a basement with a hot plate and a bar fridge. That's what they're getting charged $850 a month for. All those
sounds good, except for the futon. It could ruin your back on those things.
Look, I mean, yes, there has to be some kind of more logical approach taken to this. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, Sean Fraser, you've had him on the show. He said about a month ago, the future permanent residents are already here. They're in the foreign student cadre. So to Mike's point, that's exactly what's going to happen. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but we have to, and it isn't a bad thing, but we must understand that we are not building, Mike's suggestion about building these student residents, absolutely. By the time we got the zoning, the approvals, the research, the studies, and finally got to a point where we would offer that project to a builder to put up substantial student residents, it'll probably be 2030. I mean, it's just not even in the cards.
Okay. Yeah, and can I speak to the numbers as well? Because again, I'm not international against international students. I was an international student in two different countries. The issue is a lack of planning, and I'll give you an example. So between Canada Day of 2022 and Canada Day of 2023, our non-permanent residents, we added about 620,000 across the country. If you go to Statistics Canada right now and look at their forecasts, which haven't been updated in a year and a half, they say that we're going to add about 120,000 over that period that ended 5 months ago. And they still have this old forecast. So if you're, Mayor Crombie or Mayor Brown or any of these mayors, and Statistics Canada is saying, well, you know what, we're going to add about 120,000 non-permanent residents. We know about 10% go to Peel Region, so expect 12,000 new residents. And then when it's 62,000, how the heck are you supposed to plan for that? That's not just housing, that's transit and everything like that. So this isn't so much a numbers issue, it's a planning issue. If 10 years ago we had said, you know what, we're going to have 620,000 non-permanent residents added in 2023, that would have given us time to, as Ron said, do all of those things, build those residents. But when we make these decisions overnight, don't tell anybody, and then expect, mayors to sort of figure it out at a moment's notice, it's not going to work.
Right. So I've got I want to get on to what some potential fixes are, but I've got a non sequitur question. I assume it's a non sequitur because nobody ever brings this up. But we have a system of mortgage insurance in this country in which people with certain levels of down payment were obligated to get mortgage insurance through either CMHC or one of the small number of private sector suppliers of mortgage insurance. My understanding is that only applies up to homes that are worth $1 million or less, which is almost no home in the major cities of Canada anymore. So are there a lot of people without mortgage insurance, and does that matter? Does that have any prudential impact?
Yeah, it absolutely does. It's one of the reasons why when you see a developer is working on a new project of low rise, that the prices start at about $2 million in the GTA or in very little in Vancouver. You can't really build in Vancouver anymore. But yeah, it's what it's all about. It's because if there's no sense in trying to build something to hit that marketplace of under $1 million, because by the time you bought the land, paid the development fees, and financed the construction, I mean, you're giving money away. You couldn't do it. So should we raise it? Is that maybe a consideration? Should we raise it, which is constantly requested by those three insurers, that would be raised to, well, I should say the two private insurers. The public insurer, CMHC, is a little bit reticent about raising it. But should we do it? Hey, maybe. But at the end of the day, you have to quantify it as some sort of demand stimulus. And the other truth is we really don't build the homes for it today. Basically, we just take every townhouse being offered for $920, and they would be offered for $1 million and $1.2 million. We've got to really start to drill down into some of the more basic problems that we have. What Mike and I talked about to do with development costs, what's happened with land cost, that was really clearly illustrated by the Greenbelt debacle in Ontario, when you could move something out of zoning and suddenly it's worth 8 times the amount of money just instantly. That one stroke of a pen, oh yeah, this has now gone from being worth 10 million to 80 million. Just that simple. We've got to start to ask ourselves better questions about that, because, by the way, that $80 million uptick in value was going to be sold to somebody else for even more money. Okay, that's the other scary part. So there's so many things we've got to look at with a serious eye, but I don't necessarily believe that where the real decisions are being made at provincial and municipal levels, that those things are being addressed seriously. To your point, Dave Eby in British Columbia is maybe the only person who's made a blanket attempt to really change the landscape with province-wide upzoning. By the way, Mayor Crombie, soon to be Leader Crombie, or just now Leader Crombie in Ontario, of the Liberal Party, provincial Liberal Party. There's no upzoning allowed in Mississauga, like none. You can't do any upzoning here. I mean,
what is upzoning? Sorry.
So you can't go from a huge single family lot and say, well, we're going to turn that into fourplex. You can put a fourplex in there. We're going to mandate that. There is no ability to do that. In Toronto right now, you could do that. You could take a single family lot, specific size, and say, okay, we're going to build a fourplex here. We're going to build a sixplex. We're going to increase the density on that one particular lot. You can do that in Toronto today, in theory. We're going to find out if it's really true. But you can't even do that in Brampton or in Mississauga right now. You can't even attempt to do it. So but David Eby said, well, they're going to take the whole province and upzone it. If it's single family, now it's a fourplex, a sixplex, whatever it is. And that is a major change, but I'm not holding my breath for that to happen in Ontario.
Mike, you were nodding your head through a lot of that.
Well, I totally agree. And I wish it would, because it was essentially one of the recommendations of Ford's own task force. And this is the kind of irony about it. If you are looking at what the NDP are doing in British Columbia, they're basically implementing Ford's task force recommendations. So, you've got a conservative premier who puts together, this task force that are supposed to give conservative-friendly ideas for zoning and other affordability measures. The provincial government largely leaves them untouched, and the BC NDP says, "Yeah, that's actually some pretty good ideas in here. We'll implement ourselves." So, like Ron, I'm not holding my breath that Ontario will join, but they have the blueprint to do it, and they've had it since February 2022.
Okay, so let's help with this. Part of the problem with this issue is that politically, there's no real place of accountability, because all three levels of government are involved. A lot of the attention right now focuses on the feds, even though just a few months ago, Trudeau quite properly said, we don't have any constitutional jurisdiction over this at all. Which level of government should voters be holding accountable to fix this problem?
Well, probably all levels, but I'm going to go back, because I guess I just listened to every damn program. I've listened to every Herle Burly, every Chris Politics, so that puts me, I remember all this stuff. There's a very smart guy named David who said, ultimately, the feds can push the provinces to do things. They have the power of transfer. They have the power. They have the money. They got the most money. And we noticed it. We actually saw it. That actually just happened. We saw Mr. Freeland say, "Hey, on this short-term rental stuff, we're going to crucify you through the Tax Act. It was just that simple. The federal government took an item that is purely provincial and municipal and said, we're going to intervene in it, and we're going to make it hopeless for you to want to operate in the areas where it's been shut down, which is British Columbia, possibly in some ways on Toronto, where it's been highly restricted. Short-term rental Airbnb has been highly restricted. We're going to put the knife through it, the dagger through its heart, and say that we're going to make it impossible to work, to make money at it based on CRA. So that's a classic example of the feds reaching right into the heart of it and changing it in one stroke.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, it's a classic issue where there's basically so many issues around housing and no one order of government owns them all. So one of the big problems we have in building housing is a lack of skilled trades workers. And we could solve that through immigration. So an example I always use is that for the last 40 to 50 years, our immigration system is really biased towards bringing in the 22-year-old version of me who's going to, go teach, get a PhD and teach at a business school and inform young minds and hopefully not misinform them. My dad was a sheet metal worker. He did HVAC work in apartments back in the 60s and 70s. He would not get in under Canada's immigration point system right now. If the 22-year-old version wanted to come over, he'd probably get rejected. And I'm going to suggest that we need a lot more guys like my dad. And frankly, we probably don't need as many guys like me. So, that is something that the federal government could do that is squarely within their jurisdiction. They don't need the provinces. They don't need municipalities. But that's the challenge here, that no one level of government owns this. So it allows for a lot of finger pointing and all these kind of classic Canadian jurisdictional problems.
Why do you think we haven't seen a big intergovernment conflab about this?
I got a quick answer for you. Nobody wants to have to take the blame. Nobody wants to come out of that meeting, or the end of that meeting is everybody pointing at each other. David, you know enough about FedProov meetings to know that there's got to be a certain level of agenda agreed upon ahead of time. And I don't think you can get anything agreed upon ahead of time out of this group. So that might be a reason. By the way,
does seem like a case that calls out for executive federalism, though.
Fair, but I believe very much we should be having that meeting. That meeting should be scheduled for sometime in the early spring already. I think that it is that important. It is that massive. Like, I can't tell you, I have people who work for me here at my own company who are they're just mad, sad, and angry about their inability to ever buy a house and how bad they feel about it and how it gnaws at them. So I would tell, and by the way, you're right. Maybe even if it is just a reasonably sized condominium, they'd be happy. But the truth is, their inability to buy anything through the combination of interest rates and incredibly high prices in the GTA, it just gnaws at them. I mean, you've pointed out, David, that a switch went off in August and everybody got mad as hell at the government. Well, it just might have been that correlation of rates and prices, which convinced everybody we are screwed. If we're under 35 and we haven't got a house yet, we are utterly screwed. And I think that's supported by the polling numbers.
Right.
Yeah, and I would add to that we called, a group of us put together something called the National Housing Accord with a series of recommendations aimed at the federal government, more just on the rental side than the ownership side. And one of our key recommendations was that we need a Team Canada approach. We need Trudeau to call everyone to the table, and if they don't want to show up, then that's their loss. But I think that's shows in the polling numbers that when there's a nationwide problem, Canadians don't play jurisdictional lawyer. They go, "This is a problem everywhere. Therefore, the federal government should take care of this, rightly or wrongly." And right now, I don't think Canadians feel that that's happening from their federal government.
Okay, so they are doing a bunch of things, and the provinces are doing a bunch of things, and the municipalities are doing a bunch of things. It's not like a day goes by where you don't hear somebody doing something about housing. So are they in the process of solving this, or is it all too little? Do you get a sense that the cumulative weight of actions is going to make a big difference?
I think the federal government started moving in the right direction under the new minister. So we had the HST piece, we had the $20 billion in additional mortgage bonds. Minister Fraser's been putting on all kinds of great conditions on the national on the housing accelerator. So those are all good things. I feel like the federal government lost momentum a little bit with the fall economic statement, which really didn't have much on housing. So hopefully they can get that back, but they got to go big and they've got to go bold, and that applies to all orders of government. So I think they need to do something on that. And again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but we're not going to be able to build the homes that quickly. We've got to bring some rationality back to the international student market. I think again, it's fantastic to have so many of the world's best and brightest studying here. Let's just ramp up our housing ambitions to keep up with our enrollment growth and have a coordinated plan. Because that's the one thing you could do right away, right? That if the government, whether it be the province or the federal government, came out tomorrow and said, you know what, international student enrollments next year will be 100,000 lower than the year before, you will see prices and rents go down, and you will see them go down overnight because investors buying up those single family homes, they're going to go from buyers to sellers. They're going to go, oh, geez, okay, we're not going to get the returns we had before. That is something that government could do in 24 hours to start bringing home prices down if they chose to do it.
Ron, do you see any of the government actions adding up to a different market?
Well, the thing that always strikes me is that we have to find some way to unleash private capital in this space. There's so much more private capital that's available to build homes than anything the government could ever afford to do. I mean, you went through it yourself, David, when you actually had to pull back from public housing when you worked with Minister Martin, and it didn't. You got a call from New York one day, and hey, you're not going to roll these bonds. You guys got to think this through. And one of the first places you have to go is, well, these are big projects. We got to run them back. I mean, we got to cut those costs. I'm not too sure we might not be that far away, not from that phone call, but from some kind of feeling about, wow, we just can't keep spending if the tax base erodes due to a recession. We just can't keep throwing money at this. And let's face it, almost all the Housing Accelerator Fund goes for is subsidized housing. That's reality. So we got to unleash private capital. And right now we're actually contracting private capital. We're going to have less starts and completions this year than the previous year. We're going to have, and the peak was 2021, and we just keep going downhill from there. And 2024 is going to be another bad year. There's got to be a way to unleash private capital. And I keep coming back to these development fees, to all this leverage on land costs is just ridiculous. I mean, there's got to be a way to get through.
But Ron, okay, so my understanding is most of the municipalities are really strapped for cash to deliver the services that they need to deliver. And that, people in all of our cities are complaining about what the cities look like and how hollowed out the downtowns are and the state of public infrastructure. Well, it's not like the municipalities are rolling in cash. Maybe they're the cause of their own problem. Maybe they could be raising more revenue, but they are raising revenue through these charges, these development charges. And so if I'm trying to loop together everything that you're saying, it sounds to me like maybe in order to get the private capital building houses, the feds need to give the municipalities some money to buy down the development charges.
Sure, and definitely there's got to be an increase in property taxes. It just has to happen. But look, I don't know how much trust I deal with the public every day. I talk to individual humans every day about this stuff, and I assure you, the level of trust in municipal government, particularly in Ontario, has evaporated. I mean, if you get billions and billions of dollars and you can never finish a crosstown LRT, you've lost all credence. Nobody believes a word you're saying anymore. I don't even think that new rail transit in Ottawa works worth a damn either, right? I mean, there's real questions about municipal competency that just leach out any belief in people that, they've run out of money. Well, they can't even finish a rail line. There's $8 billion up in smoke and it's never going to be finished. The level of trust and the level of belief in the capacity of these municipalities to do the right thing vanishes. So people say to themselves, We keep pouring more money down on them. They want money from the feds. They want money from everywhere. There's a competence issue that is actually becoming real in the public's mind for a bunch of these cities and towns.
Mike, what's your take on that?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And somebody who's, more on the sort of progressive wing of the political spectrum, I think this is a huge issue for us, that, so many progressive parties, whether it be Liberal, NDP, Greens, so on, are really trying to put their eggs in the kind of social housing, government building more housing basket. And I think a lot of particularly younger Canadians, who, can't get to class on time because the LRT keeps breaking down, going like, you can't even run a bus, and all of a sudden you're gonna build me a home. So I actually think state capacity is absolutely an issue that the center left has to figure out, because it is absolutely eroding confidence in the solution set, whether it be social housing or even more free market solutions, like having more infrastructure built and then letting the private sector build those homes. That erosion of confidence, I think, is a real problem in Canada.
All right, so you reacted to Ron's dismissal of my point. You did not react to my point, which was you've actually given advice to the feds. I'm trying to figure this out about how we get the municipalities what is a pathway to get the municipalities to reduce the development charges, to reduce the cost of building new homes?
I should think it has to come from the province, because all of these are set by fees. So I think we have to look at ways to fund infrastructure, in other ways. That why is it necessarily that we have to, let's say it's a water treatment plant. Why can't we put the amortized cost on that on everybody's water bill over time, rather than trying to pay for the whole thing up front with development charges and things like that? So I think we have to look at the formulas that other provinces use. That Ontario is a bit of an outlier when it comes to these things. That 9 other provinces find ways. Well, maybe there are some exceptions, but you look at Quebec, you look at Manitoba, the provinces that border us, they don't have these completely bananas fees and charges that Ontario does. So I do think that's one that the provincial government has to look at, but the federal government can influence that. We give the provinces a lot of money for a lot of different things. Maybe there's some kind of deal that could be struck between the two orders of government to start to address development charges. Because ultimately, municipalities are creatures of the province. The province sets the rules on DCs. So it's up to the provinces to make this work.
Right. Hey, did either of you guys watch Poilievre's 15-minute video?
Got about 10 minutes of it, yeah.
Yeah, I saw it.
Okay. What'd you think?
I think the comms group over there is doing pretty well. I looked at some numbers about apparently Trudeau put out a video at almost identical time, and the viewership and the reaction was radically different. Look, if you're putting out a video about how shitty things are, you're probably going to get a big audience, okay, a huge audience, because people feel it. As I said, right in my own office, day in and day out, it's there. We feel it. We understand it. The frustration people have. So yeah, you put out a video that says there's a lot of things wrong, and I think I know how to fix it. You're going to get a very, very strong positive reaction.
And what do both of you think about? It was a substantive piece of communication by political standards, and it laid out a full diagnosis about what the problem was and why it wasn't, how we got to this place, and then it laid out some solutions for how we move past it. What did you think about those? What did you think about his diagnosis and his prescriptions?
Well, we go to the videos. So first of all, I love this new kind of idea, and I say that without any irony. I think this is fantastic when politicians speak in full paragraphs and really lay out this idea. So I do think it's wonderful, and I would break the video out into 3 segments. The first 5 minutes I thought was fantastic, which laid out how this is affecting everyday Canadians. I really like this Niagara, Ontario versus Niagara, New York, and how much more expensive things are here. which I think actually asks the right question of why is it that when you traverse this invisible line and get into Canada, everything is so much more expensive? I think that's the right question to be asking. I think where it falls down a little bit is then in the next 5 minutes, it basically gives a theory of how we got here. And it basically gives two reasons. The one I think has more substance is this municipal piece that we've been talking about for the last 10 minutes on regulations and development charges and red tape. Yeah, all of that makes sense. I can't really quibble with any of that. The second one is deficits and fiscal policy and monetary policy, which is obviously very attractive to Poilievre. But I'm looking at this going, okay, well, if we want to be more like the United States, how can you make the argument we need to have lower deficits? Has anybody looked at the US's balance sheet lately? The American deficit in 1 week is larger than Canada's in a year. It is over 52 times larger. And yes, they have more people, but not 52 times more. So I think it kind of breaks down there. The final 5 minutes is the solutions. I think the solutions, like if you buy that theory of what's wrong, I think then the solutions kind of make sense. But I don't think he's diagnosed all the problems. I think he's diagnosed some correctly, like the municipal side. Some, the monetary fiscal side goes completely against his own argument, and then ignores things like the lack of skilled trades workers. I note that he doesn't touch the population growth issue at all. Does not address immigration, does not address international students, will not go there, which is a very interesting choice. I would say
nothing on the demand side.
Nothing on the demand side, and as well, if you look at his policy on how he's going to incentivize municipalities, what he's basically done is basically give a random list of cities and say, these are the expensive cities. And if they don't build enough, we're not going to give them as much funding. And if they go above and beyond, we'll give them more. Interestingly enough, he left out a lot of cities in the 905. So Burlington is not on that list. Oakville is not on that list. Go to any of those cities. They are expensive as hell. And they are just conveniently left off Poilievre's list. So, just a bunch of random cities in the 905 would be given the light touch from Poilievre. So I'll let the listeners and viewers speculate on why that might be, but it's one heck of a choice.
Right.
And as a quick comment on the Niagara versus Niagara debate, there are fewer people living in upstate New York every single year for the last 10 years. I mean, there's a reason why houses are cheaper in a place where there's less people every single year. So there's a pretty definitive difference there.
Yeah. So my alma mater, the University of Rochester, is not bringing in nearly as many students, and that might be a reason. So go Yellow Jackets. But I think that's a big difference. So Ron's absolutely right that whether it be Buffalo or the Finger Lakes region, most of upstate New York is depopulating, and that's going to make home prices cheap.
Right. Ron, I got to ask you, why'd you quit after 10 minutes?
After 10 minutes? My attention span is pretty lousy on the weekend. Just a brief bit of personal insight. The office Christmas party was on Friday, and I was sitting across from John Webster over with a large bottle of cognac and several bottles of wine. And I think I was just on pure recovery for 2 days over the weekend. So there
I see. Yeah. But you didn't solve all these problems in that conversation over that cognac.
We created a few new problems, but no, none were solved. You're right.
Okay. So where does this all net out? Like, you're seeing how governments are responding. And they are responding in some ways and not others. And they seem more inclined to do certain types of things than other types of things. You have a general projection for what interest rates are going to do. So when you talk to people in their 20s or 30s right now, what do you tell them the prospects are for their prospects for home ownership?
Well, this precise moment in time, poor. Look, we also have to address one central fact for younger people in this country. We have had wage stagnation in this country for a long time. I mean, when we look, let's
Thanks
even
for
look at some
bringing
of the
that up.
government settlements. The government settlements have been at 3% in the last little bit for 3-year contracts. We had 10%. We had nearly 10% inflation, 8-point-something% inflation all through 2022. Like, there is legitimate wage stagnation in this country. So when you couple that with this incredible increase in house prices, which, by the way, circle back to another wonderful, I'm doing nothing but kissing up to the host today, another wonderful Herle point that literally no one who bought a house before 2015, virtually no one wants to see those values decline precipitously. That also does not exist. So it literally is two solitudes, to steal from that old book on a different subject. It's two complete solitudes. We got people who desperately want to see prices come down, and we got a whole bunch of people who think this is the most positive thing that happened in my retirement ever. So I'm not too interested.
Yeah, it's like it's such a false discussion, because whether it's Pierre Poilievre in his video or Sean Fraser or anybody else, they talk as if young people can have affordable homes and my home won't go down by $1, right? That's sort of like the theory on which we're operating on. But as I would understand supply and demand, it's not going to work that way.
Yeah, and I think that's a bit of what Poilievre was probably trying to do with this video is kind of explain to older voters why he keeps talking about this issue and why this is a problem kind of for the economy as a whole. But I would say that I don't think this is zero sum as people think there are. There are a lot of homeowners who bought homes before 2015 who they have an 18-year-old who would like to go to college or university but can't go to the school of their choice because they can't afford to live in that city. Or they got a 28-year-old who's living in the basement that they can't get rid of. Or they have a 38-year-old who was able to get a home but had to drive until they qualified, and now that family from Toronto lives in like Sarnia or someplace. And and nothing against Sarnia, though, Sting, not so much. But Sarnia is nice. But the point being that those 38-year-old that now live in Sarnia and have kids, grandma and grandpa in Cabbagetown, only get to see those kids on FaceTime. And I personally believe that there's no force of nature more powerful than an angry grandma. So I actually don't think this is as zero sum as people think. I think there are a lot of existing homeowners who feel like they're getting screwed one way or another with the status quo.
Yeah. Hey, I want to end on this note because Ron quoted me, and it was something that I learned doing focus groups back in 2014 when I had a group of middle-class people in a focus group, and none of them thought they were middle class because none of them owned a home or saw any prospect that they would own a home. And as Ron says, that was definitional to being middle class in Canada. If you go sort of up a level, if we don't solve this problem, and if we have a couple of generations come up that aren't part of the home ownership Canadian dream, what are the implications of that?
Well, I'm going to just suggest that this anger you see today will not dissipate amongst young people. It will not. I mean, this thing you're talking about is still very, very real. If people think they're never going to own a home, if people think their wages are never going to catch up, if people believe that this place that we live in, and I know all three of us love this country. If all these people think there's got to be some place better than this, you better keep the MLS listings from Houston away from them, because they're going to see a difference in pricing that will blow their brains out. Like, it is literally a third of the cost to live in a huge city with tons of facilities and a growing job market. They'll be, if you can buy a house for 1/3 the price of what you can buy it for in the GTA and make the same or better salary, boy, that is a compelling argument.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that I worry about. And I, kind of criticize Poilievre's video, so I'll say something nice about him. Overall, I think he's absolutely right when he couches this in terms of a social contract. I think that's bang on. And we see what happens in societies when those forms of social contracts start to break down. that you get, polarization, people taking extreme positions one way or another. Right. So, you can get these kind of burn down the system type folks across the board. Absolutely, we should be worried about brain drain. One of the big things that really worries me is that this 40 to 50 year consensus we had on immigration is just going to go away. It's one of the things that's made country great. And it's hard, and both Ron and I have to explain ourselves over and over that, the issue is a lack of planning. Right, that we need people to come in and contribute to this great project called Canada, but we have to do it in a sensible and planned manner. And nothing is going to break that consensus more than people saying, "Well, I can't afford a home because politician XYZ, let in too many of these types or those types." So I'm really concerned about that we are eroding support of our immigration system.
Absolutely. Listen, you guys, I can't thank you enough. You're both multi-time appearances on the Herle Burly, and I can't thank you enough for being part of my sounding board on this subject. This subject's not going anywhere. I assume we'll be talking about it again in the relatively near future. Thanks a lot for being so generous with your time today. I want to thank everybody who watched or listened to the show, all of you curious Herle Burly-ites out there, and of course our presenting sponsor TELUS and our sponsor CN Rail. See you next week, everybody, with more of the Herle Burly. Merry Christmas, you two guys. Thanks for coming on.
Merry Christmas, David.
Merry Christmas.
Herle Burly. Herle Burly.